All right, welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Today, we're diving headfirst into a pretty massive turning point in American legal history. I'm talking about the 1803 case, Marbury v. Madison. And, this case, it's not just some dusty old legal document. This thing set the stage for what we now call judicial review.
Yeah, judicial review, it's kind of a big deal. Basically, it gives the courts, especially the Supreme Court, the ability to kind of look over a law, something that Congress passed.
Yeah.
Or even something the president did. And they get to decide, hey, does this actually jive with the Constitution, or is it
No.
like totally off base? And if they decide it's, unconstitutional, they can just say, nope, this law's no good.
Boom. Just like that. So today, we're going to really try to get under the hood of Marbury v. Madison, see how it basically reshaped the Supreme Court's power, gave them a whole different level of clout, and maybe more importantly, we're going to figure out why this case from way back then, why it still matters so much to us today, in our legal system and our political lives. It's still shaping stuff.
Yeah.
So let's get into it. Where do we even begin with this thing?
Well, to really get the impact of Marbury v. Madison, you got to put yourself back in that time. You got to think about the election of 1800. I mean, you had John Adams, the Federalist. He was already president. And you had Thomas Jefferson, the Democratic Republican guy. They were going head to head. And let me tell you, it was brutal.
Oh, yeah. Brutal doesn't even cut it. They were not playing nice. So in the end, Jefferson wins, right? And Adams and his whole Federalist crew, they're not exactly happy campers about handing over the reins. So what do? In last-ditch attempt to hold on to some kind of power, they pull this move. They pass the Judiciary Act of 1801.
And that act, that's the key here, is a pretty blatant attempt to, stack the deck in the judicial branch. What they did was they created all these new federal courts, district courts, circuit courts, tons of new judgeships just popping up, which, of course, gave Adams this golden opportunity. He gets to appoint a whole bunch of judges who happen to agree with him, his Federalist buddies. They even messed with the Supreme Court, shrunk it from 6 justices down to 5, probably trying to limit how much power Jefferson would have there, with appointments and all that.
Right, trying to tie his hands a bit. And Adams didn't waste any time, did he? I mean, he was literally signing appointment papers until the clock ran out on his presidency. In those final hours, he appointed a whole army of Federalist loyalists, 16 new circuit court judges, and, get this, 42 justices of the peace just for D.C. And these guys, they got this nickname that kind of stuck, the Midnight Judges. Because, Adams is appointing them right up until midnight on his last day in office.
And that's where William Marbury comes in, our main player in all this drama. He was a big supporter of Adams, and Adams nominated him for one of those Justice of the Peace positions in D.C. Not a bad gig, right? 5-year appointment. The Senate, they confirmed all of Adams' picks, but there was one last crucial step. Those commissions, they had to be officially delivered by the Secretary of State. And guess who was holding that job at the time? John Marshall, the very same guy who was about to become the Chief Justice.
So the plot thickens. March 4th rolls around, Jefferson's officially in office, and his new Secretary of State is James Madison. But Jefferson, he's got his own agenda, right? He's not about to let all these last-minute Federalist appointees just waltz into their new jobs. He tells his acting Secretary of State, Levi Lincoln, put a stop to those deliveries. They were saying, hey, these commissions weren't delivered before Adams left, so they're not valid.
Basically, they were saying, we can just ignore these appointments. A bunch of those commissions, including the one for Marbury, never made it to the guys they were meant for. But, Marbury, he wasn't going down without a fight. He was like, hey, this is my job. I was appointed fair and square.
I mean, he did have the signed commission, right? Everything was official. So what do? He decided to go straight to the top, straight to the Supreme Court. He wanted the court to issue something called a writ of mandamus. It's basically a court order forcing James Madison to hand over that commission. He was basing this whole thing on the Judiciary Act of 1789. He claimed that this law gave the Supreme Court the power to issue these orders to federal officials.
And this is where things get really juicy. John Marshall, he's the Chief Justice now, and he's a sharp legal mind. He finds himself in this delicate spot. On one hand, he's like, yeah, Marbury's got a point. I mean, the appointment was legit. The commission should have been delivered. And this whole thing, it just reeked of political maneuvering, right?
Total power play. And remember, Marshall was part of Adams's administration. He was the one who actually signed Marbury's commission. So there was definitely some personal history mixed in with all this.
Absolutely. But Marshall, he sees the bigger picture, too. He knows that the Supreme Court back then, It didn't have the same kind of authority and respect that it does today. It needed to flex its muscles a bit,
Right.
establish itself as a major player in the government.
Show everyone they weren't just a rubber stamp. So what did this legal mastermind do? What was his play?
He came up with a decision, a ruling, that was pure brilliance. First, he addresses Marbury's claims, and as we've said, he actually sides with Marbury. He's like, yeah, you were appointed. You have a right to that commission. Madison shouldn't have withheld it.
But then comes the twist.
Oh, yeah, it's a big twist. Marshall says, hold on a second. That section of the Judiciary Act of 1789, the one that Marbury's using to bring his case straight to us, that part's actually unconstitutional.
Wait, hold up. So the law that's supposed to be on Marbury's side, that's supposed to help him get what he's owed, the Supreme Court says it's illegal. How does that even work? How did Marshall get to that?
It all hinges on this difference between something called original jurisdiction and appellate jurisdiction. See, the Constitution, Article 3, it spells out very clearly what kind of cases can start right off the bat in the Supreme Court, like cases about ambassadors or big disputes between states. But all the other cases, they're supposed to go through the lower courts first, and then maybe, if there's an appeal, they come up to the Supreme Court. That's the appellate jurisdiction.
Gotcha. So like a hierarchy of courts. In Marbury's case, it wasn't about some international incident or a state fighting with another state. It was about a job, an appointment in D.C. So it didn't fit under the Supreme Court's original jurisdiction, right? Like according to the Constitution, they shouldn't have been dealing with it directly.
Exactly. The Judiciary Act of 1789, it tried to make the Supreme Court's original jurisdiction bigger, give them more power to issue these writs of mandamus to federal officials. But Marshall's argument was, hold up, Congress can't just change the Constitution with a regular old law. The Constitution, it lays out the whole structure of the government, how the branches work, their powers. You can't just redraw those lines because Congress feels like it.
So Marshall was basically saying, Marbury, you're right, you got a raw deal, Madison messed up, but this law you're using to come to us, it doesn't actually work, it goes against the Constitution, so sorry, we can't really do anything for you here.
That's it, in a nutshell.
Yeah.
And remember, it wasn't just Marshall going rogue here. The other justices who were part of the decision, they backed him up. Two justices, William Cushing and Alfred Moore, they recused themselves. So it ended up being a unanimous decision for the justices who were involved.
It sounds like some seriously slick legal maneuvering. Marbury loses out on his job, but the Supreme Court walks away with something way bigger in the long run.
Oh, yeah. That's the brilliance of what Marshall did.
Yeah.
It was a loss for Marbury, sure, but it was a huge power grab for the whole judicial branch. By saying that part of the Judiciary Act was unconstitutional, he basically created this principle of judicial review. Bam, just like that.
Okay, let's break that down for everyone listening. What does judicial review actually mean, in plain English?
Well, at its heart, judicial review is the power of the courts to take a look at laws. Laws from Congress, actions from the president, and they decide, hey, does this line up with the Constitution? If a court, and especially the Supreme Court, says, nope, this law doesn't fit with the Constitution, then that law is basically toast. It's unconstitutional, so it's no good anymore. It's like the courts get to be the referees, making sure the government is playing by the rules of the Constitution.
And Marbury v. Madison, that was the first time the Supreme Court ever used this power, right? Like they put it on display for everyone to see.
You got it. Before this case, people were arguing about whether the Supreme Court even had this power. The Constitution doesn't come right out and say it. But Marshall, with his clever reasoning, he's like, yes, we do have this power. He claimed this authority for the whole judicial branch, a bold move, saying the court gets to have the final word on what's constitutional and what's not.
So even though Marbury never got his job, this case, it really set the stage for the Supreme Court to become a major force, right? Like they became a true equal to the other branches of government, Congress and the president.
Absolutely. Think about it. Without judicial review, Congress could just pass any law they wanted. The president could do whatever he felt like, even if it totally went against the Constitution. There'd be no one to keep them in check. Marbury v. Madison, it's like they drew this line in the sand. They said, the courts are here to make sure everyone follows the rules of the Constitution.
Okay, but some of our listeners might be thinking, this was over 200 years ago. Why should I care about some old case about a judge who didn't even get his job? So why does this still matter today?
It matters a lot. I mean, think about it. Every time you hear about a court striking down a law, saying it's unconstitutional, whether it's the state court or the Supreme Court, that decision, it all goes back to judicial review. It's like the foundation of so much of our legal system.
Yeah, it's everywhere. Like, think about all the legal battles we see happening today. Healthcare, technology, what you can say online, free speech, all that, privacy rights, everything. These issues, they end up in the courts all the time, and it's the judges who decide, is this law okay? Does it follow the Constitution?
And to really get the impact, imagine if Marbury v. Madison had never happened. What if the courts didn't have this power? Congress and the president, they could do whatever they wanted, maybe even take away people's freedoms. It'd be a totally different system.
It really makes you realize how much power came from this one case. It wasn't a revolution. It wasn't some big change to the Constitution. It was just a really clever legal argument that completely changed how power works in America.
And it raises a question for everyone listening. How often do you see this judicial review happening? Think about recent Supreme Court cases, all the debate about them. All of that, it's because of Marbury v. Madison. Understanding this case, it helps you understand how American law and the government, how it all works, how it changes.
So let's recap. Marbury v. Madison, 1803. It starts with a political mess over judges, ends with Chief Justice John Marshall making this genius move. Marbury, he doesn't get his job, but the Supreme Court, they get this huge new power, judicial review, the power to say, this law, it's no good, it goes against the Constitution.
And that power, it's not just history, it's shaping our world right now. It affects how we understand our rights, what the government can and can't do.
So we want you all to think about this stuff, go deeper. When you see a court strike down a law, think about what that means. What are the arguments for and against judicial review? It's happening all the time.
Because, understanding Marbury v. Madison, it makes you a better citizen. You can understand a legal system better, how our Constitution works, how it's debated.
And here's a final thought for everyone to chew on. This power of judicial review, it's huge, right? So if the courts have that much power, what are their responsibilities? How do we make sure they're accountable, in a democracy? People are still arguing about this stuff, and it all goes back to a case that happened over 200 years ago. Pretty amazing, huh?